everybody, and welcome back to another Toonkind at 12 FPS. My name is Avi, and today I am doing the third and final solo FPS for the Yedo trip. Yes, this is the last one. Once again, I have transcribed or pre-written a script that I will be reading live in this recording. The link to which will be posted in the video description. In fact, I think I will post it because I forgot to. Lol. In the roll zone. Give me 1 second. This is against all odds. A wonderful title that I think would be very apt considering all the fun little things that I've done here. But yes, let us just jump right into it. As I try to get into character, excuse me. Thank you for coming on such short notice, Minori says as she sets her bag down on the booth seat beside her. It's small and fits neatly between her and the wall of the diner, so she's not too worried about it getting snagged while she has lunch with Azumi. Azumi, of course, is sitting across the table from her, arms folded on top of it as he glances in her direction. In all honesty, she hadn't been expecting him to accept the invitation to come meet her at the diner on Central Street, but she had to make an effort. Even if it is for an admittedly selfish reason, she had to make an effort to reach out and speak with him again. There is a lot that she has on her mind and a few questions she wants to ask. That's not something you have to thank me for, Azumi replies with a half-hearted huff. I needed something to do anyway. He looks different. She's not sure in what way, but to Minori there is a different way to how he holds himself now compared to how he used to, from what she can remember. Perhaps the lack of a facade has made a physical impact? Or is this more of a perceived difference, and she's projecting the feeling? Whatever the case, it doesn't change the fact that Azumi looks his age. The age he should be had he not died, that is. It's almost like he didn't die in the first place. Like the rumors of him simply up and disappearing were true, but she knows better. She'd been there with the other spirit rogues when it happened, after all. Still, Minori continues. It was a sudden invitation, and I wasn't expecting you to join me at all. You could have just as easily declined and done something else with your day. A half smirk plays at Azumi's lips, and it's a familiar sight, even if in a different light. In that moment, she's reminded of old conversations from years ago. Sitting at a meeting, surrounded by other members of the Spirit Rogues as they exchange biting words, never too antagonistic, but just enough to rile each other up. She's played the memories of those conversations over and over in her head, pulling apart each second and examining them as if they could have given her some hints to what was going on in the other's head at the time. Where would the fun in that be? But Azumi is an excellent deceiver. He'd hidden his cards well, and she couldn't risk calling his bluff during those times. After all, they knew he was hiding something, that his intentions weren't just to change Sai's heart and have the Spirit Rogues cease their operations. They'd all been wary of whatever he'd said, the plans he'd made, the tricks up his sleeves. They wanted to make their gamble work. It wasn't in their best interest to play it safe. Maybe she ought to play by the same rules here. A waitress comes by and takes their orders. Minori goes through the motions as if everything's ordinary, and for what it's worth, it appears as though Azumi is doing the same. Truth be told, she's not sure if he appreciates it, but she wants to work her way up before poking at the reason why she asked to meet with him in the first place. Or at the very least have a bit of time to prepare herself before he asks outright, which she has a feeling he might do anyway. The expected weight of being in the same space as each other after so very long lingers in the conversation, and she hums thoughtfully as she hands over her menu to the waitress. Azumi, however, moves in before she can as the stranger leaves. Is this meeting for business or for some sort of self-indulgence? And he beats her to the punch. But that's fine. It would be foolish not to expect Azumi to get straight to the point. He is, after all, a detective, and even if some of it had been a facade, she knew from her sister how good he really was. So Minori saves face. If she plays her cards right, she can keep the conversation out of Azumi's full control. In all honesty, it's a bit of both, she admits. She watches the other shift slightly, a brow raising in her direction. He hadn't expected that then. Inwardly, Minori takes the moment to appreciate breaking the conceptualized binary he presented. A minor win. I really did want to have lunch with you, but I'd be lying if I said there weren't a few things I wanted to ask you about. Well, Azumi rolls his eyes, leans back into his seat, and crosses his arms. You don't seem to be the only one. She gives a laugh. Can you blame the others for that? No, I suppose not, though I can't say I appreciate the indirect route. Of course you wouldn't, detective. Is that supposed to mean something? It means that you've got a very strict way of saying things. Very by the book. I resent that. Besides, that's quite the claim from an old student council president. Oh, please, we both know that I'm the one with much more flexible thinking between the two of us. Of course you'd say that, Empress. A smirk plays on her lips at that. The banter is familiar and yet refreshing in a way that takes her a moment to realize what it is. She's missed this. She'd always seen Azumi as a rival of sorts, if only because of his relationship with Sai, but she hadn't realized how much she missed having this sort of conversation. To match wits with someone and know they won't back down easily. To know that they could retaliate in kind and make it much more interesting. She wonders if Azumi feels the same way. Azumi sighs and tilts his head back, though, and with a leveled gaze in Minori's direction, switches gears. Why don't you start asking your questions? Aw, but I thought we were having fun. Minori chuckles to herself. And from what she can tell, they really were. Even if Azumi huffs and rolls his eyes at that statement, she can see the way the corner of his lips twitch as he tries to prevent himself from smiling. At the very least, it's a relief to know that the feeling is mutual. It's enough to make her think that maybe, just maybe, they can go back to how their relationship had been like before. But he did ask, so she answers. It's about my sister, Sai. Azumi shifts, seemingly uncomfortable with the topic, but not entirely surprised by it. Yes, she supposes that's fair. She is the younger sister of an adult figure he'd become relatively close to, so it likely was something he expected to be brought up. But she notes that he's not about to back out of the conversation entirely, at least not yet, and relaxes slightly. That makes this slightly easier to handle. What about her? Well, uh-oh. Now that she's gotten this far, she doesn't know how to continue. A sigh, and she grasps at the first thing that she can think of to use as a recovery. You know that she does care about you, yes? Even after all that you've done, she's done nothing but worried the entire time you've been back in town. I'm aware, Azumi huffs, glancing away momentarily. Honestly, with all that she'd done while I was in police custody, it was kind of obvious. But I can't say I understand why. The Azumi she knows is nothing but a lie. Minori lets out an exasperated sigh at that. Believe me, I think she already knows. But that's kind of the point I'm trying to make. You may not have been genuine back then, but I've seen how she'd been acting after you died. I think upon maybe retrospection, she might have noticed a few things about your mannerisms back when the two of you had been working together. And even then, she still went out of her way to make sure you were as safe as you could be while you were in police custody. Which, I think we both know, is not an easy feat. We both know how Harada had ended up after he'd been captured. Azumi's expression contorts slightly. Not quite a wince, but giving the impression of one. Things are not quite so black and white as you seem to want to make them out to be, Minori continues. Your actions, when given context, are not only understandable, but can be sympathetic. Even after everything, of course she'd be worried about you. You were a teenager working with her who'd been unfairly treated and manipulated by the adults around him. Why wouldn't she be? She watches him bite the inside of his cheek, a contemplative look on his face. She, however, does not get the chance to ask what is on his mind as the waitress returns with their food. A moment passes in silence as they both begin to eat, and Minori finds herself wondering, did something come to his attention suddenly? Did his detective intuition connect two dots together, or perhaps as Corey said something? Rather rude if it is that last one. They're still in the middle of a conversation. Or perhaps he's simply looking over the cards in his hand and trying to decide what move to make next. May I ask you an odd question? He asks, and Minori raises her brows before she finishes chewing. It seems like a fair trade. Azumi hums and shakes his head. Do you think I'm a monster? Monstrously annoying, maybe. The answer comes easily if a bit of snort returns to her tone, but he seems to take it in stride with a soft snort of his own. Minori's nose wrinkles and the corners of her lips quirk upwards, but she sets the thought to decide for a moment. Why do you ask? He shrugs. I'm not entirely sure myself. Maybe some strange curiosity, I suppose. I expected you to hate me, really. After all, I did keep your sister away from home and even had planned to kill her as well. So, do you? That's a bit difficult to answer, she replies. But I don't think I would go that far. No. She shakes her head. Truthfully, when we were younger and butting heads, I was incredibly jealous of you, because Sai always seemed to be spending more time with you than she did with me. And honestly, it is very difficult for me to say that I trust you, especially after all that you've done. But hate is a bit of a strong word. Like I said, things aren't always so black and white like that. Right. Azumi responds with a heavy sigh and takes another bite of his food. Minori sees the opportunity and she takes the risk. Is something on your mind? The other pauses, but it's not the reluctant kind of pause that she'd come to expect from this conversation. It seems more so that he is trying to find a way to put something into words, what with the way his jaw clenches and the way his lips twitch into a noticeable frown. At that moment, she realizes that this is a very odd situation. Like, Azumi is trying to play with his cards facing upwards, but years of being so stubbornly persistent with his facade has led him to develop an equally stubborn habit of still trying to hide his emotions. Even if the cards are on the table, she still can't quite clearly make out what he's trying to make sense of. At least, not until he says something first. It's a bit difficult to explain, Azumi says, making a vague gesture with the fork in his hand. There is sound logic to what you mean. As in, yes, I logically know that not everything is so clean cut with these things, and that despite people's best efforts, not everything will fit neatly into little boxes. But at the same time, I can't bring myself to believe it. Or at least I can't bring myself to believe it with what I've done. It's like there's some sort of obstacle in my thoughts. A hurdle I can't leap over, or a gap I can't cross. Minori hesitates for a moment. That was surprisingly genuine of him. Like, you can see 2 points in a case, but are struggling to find the connection between them? Did you have to go for the detective analogy? He lets out an amused sigh, rolling his eyes. Yes, something along those lines. I've ruined lives, Yoshihiko. I've killed people and enjoyed the act of killing. I likely will still enjoy it. But even then, there is a clear delivery of justice for those who've committed such atrocities. Shouldn't I be deserving of such punishment too? And Minori falls silent at that. Perhaps the truth is that, after everything, she doesn't know the answer to that question. But she is a spirit rogue. She, of all people, knows that the question of justice and punishment is never easy to answer. It's why they have their unanimous decision rule, after all. Maybe the fact of the matter is that, in the end, there is no right or wrong answer. I think your fallacy is connecting justice with punishment, she says at last, pushing her bangs back into place. Maybe you are deserving of punishment, but there is a difference between the punishment you deserve and the punishment you think you deserve. If all you do is suffer without the chance of getting better, at that point it's not justice anymore. She sighs, gaze meeting with Azumi's. You asked me if I think you're a monster. I think you're a person, and that a person is capable of monstrous things. But unlike monsters, you are able to feel remorse for the things that you've done, and because of that, you are capable of redeeming yourself. Azumi's lips form a thin line. Do you think I'm worthy of redemption, then? It's not a matter of worthiness, Azumi. Minori lets out an exasperated sigh. It's a matter of striving towards betterment, of wanting to do better than the person you were before. I told you that it's difficult for me to trust you again, but I do trust Arata's judgment. And if he says that you've been trying to do better than you have been, even without the trouble and difficulties you've been having, I'll believe him on that. In fact, after meeting you here today, I can tell that you are trying. That's what it's always been about, hasn't it? There have been reports of the Spirit Rogue's lesser-known targets apologizing for what they've done and promising to do better. That had been enough. Why would he be any different? If you want my opinion, Azumi, she continues, I think you have been redeemable ever since you made the decision to change. Ever since the engine room. Azumi freezes at that, grip tightening around the silverware as his gaze drops to his plate of food. In the silence that follows, Minori wonders if she played the wrong move, and she watches as the dice seem to tumble endlessly before they land. Even so, she can't seem to find it in herself to think of something else to say. In fact, she thinks she stands by her statement. What Azumi had done in those final moments had stuck with her, with all of them, ever since the bulkhead door shut and sealed him away from the rest of them. If this is what it takes for him to finally come to terms with himself, then so be it. It's still very difficult to believe that, Azumi murmurs after a long moment. Minori hums a reply. I think you should talk to someone about that problem of yours. If nothing else, it could help set you down on the proper path to deconstructing that way of thinking, or at the very least teach you how to handle it properly. The detective frowns thoughtfully, but his hands move to gather food onto his fork. I don't know how I feel about unloading my secrets to a total stranger, but that does remind me that I ought to chat with Satomi about something. Ah, right. Arata did mention something about coming up with a way to help Azumi after speaking with Dr. Masaru. Absent-mindedly, Minori remembers a conversation she once had with the good doctor, back in the high school nurse's office. She wonders how his research is going. The thought is set aside in favor of the current situation. If Azumi is considering talking to Arata about help, and if he follows through with it, that means that this conversation is a success. She wins this round. A smile finds its way onto her face. I think you should, she replies. What's with that look on your face? Nothing important, she lies in good humor, and ignores the way Azumi's eyes narrow in her direction. I also think you should talk to Sai again. She does miss you. Right. Azumi shakes his head and takes another bite, chews, and swallows. Enlightening conversation as always, Yoshihiko. Well, I had fun, didn't you? I don't know if fun is the word I'd use, but maybe it was somewhat enjoyable. Oh, you wound me. And so it goes. Cards on the table, playing with them face up. She hopes Arata can work out the rest from here, for Azumi's sake. And that's it. Thank you so much for listening, everybody, both now and in the future. For now, I will bid you all a good time zone. Bye!